Welcome to another edition of A Noise from the Deep, the Greenleaf Music Podcast. My name's Dave Douglas, and that is the music of Trish Clowes from her new album on Greenleaf Music. It's called A View with a Room. That tune is called Amber. Trish is a UK-based saxophonist and composer, director of a million projects. She'll talk about her work supporting For Refugees, which is a great organization that one can look up and support. And thanks for listening to the podcast. As always, please visit greenleafmusic.com to get the latest info about all the artists recording there, including my work. And please subscribe if you can to get the entire catalog and all the episodes of this podcast and all the extras where artists talk about some of their favorite artists. So once again, thanks for listening. And here is Trish Clowes. Trish Clowes, thank you so much for joining me from the UK.
Thanks for having me, Dave. My pleasure.
Well, one of the upsides of this Zoom age is that I get to talk to friends overseas. And so it's just so great that you were able to make time and we were able to get the time differences to work.
Yeah. It's just about doable, isn't it, with the US? Like Australia is a bit trickier,
Australia is tough. And you're in the middle of a tour too, so fantastic to make the time. You're opening very soon at Wigmore Hall, right?
Yeah, on Saturday. It's very exciting. So
that's great. So anyone who's listening to this podcast, this Saturday mentioned will have passed, but hopefully you were there anyway. So we were listening to a track from your new album that's on Greenleaf. Called A View with a Room, and the track is called Amber. And I thought before we get started, maybe I would just ask you about the person who the song is dedicated to and your involvement with that cause.
Sure, yeah. So Amber is for Amber Bauer, who runs this amazing charity called For Refugees. They've just changed it, so people who've followed this before will know it as Donate for Refugees, but they've just kind of switched it up this last month or so. And I met Amber, it's kind of like 5 years ago, I think now. And it was because I was writing an orchestral piece, actually, and it was a commission, and it was going to be premiered in a sort of family concert kind of setting. And so there was no kind of real limitations on me, in terms of what I could do, but I just felt like it just seemed like such a great opportunity to talk about something important. And so I was kind of, I'd already done something with another composer earlier that year, I think, where we'd sort of been talking about migration and refugees, and so it was kind of already on my mind anyway. And so I kind of settled on talking about it within this orchestral piece. And obviously, you know, it's pretty subjective in terms of what people interpret with music if it's instrumental. But, you know, I just put a lot of effort into the program notes, and basically as part of figuring out what I wanted to do, I sent out an email to a refugee day centre in Croydon, which isn't far from where I live in Catford. It's about half an hour drive kind of thing, South London, or south of London. They, at the time, I think they were kind of shut down or on a summer break or something. I kind of forget, but the guy put me in touch with Amber Bauer, Peter, who's sadly no longer with us actually. But yeah, he put me on to Amber, and he was like, "Oh, she's brilliant. She'll kind of steer you." So we had this like amazing conversation, you know, for about an hour, like at least. Just didn't know her, never met her before, and just really inspiring. Talked about all kinds of stuff, and then cutting a long story short, she sent me an email, you know, within a few days, maybe a week, and was like, "Oh, I don't suppose you'd consider being an ambassador for the charity," you know, because obviously I was going to have this opportunity to talk about refugee crisis, and it just kind of all came together like that. Yeah. And so ever since, I've just sort of tried to, it's an awareness thing really, but also just giving some sort of you know, Amber gives out a lot emotionally to the other volunteers that she works with, not just her own charity, but other grassroots charities that she works with. And so I sort of see my role as kind of giving her a bit of sparkle, you know, and encouragement, you know. So that's kind of how we
that's great.
Came to know each other. Yeah.
It's so incredibly important right now too. I mean, it's just, who would have thought this would be where we were, but it's great that you're shouting out to her. I love the tune too; it's very peppy, and you're definitely giving her sparkle.
Yeah, giving her some. I mean, she's so dynamic. She's like such a force of nature. So it definitely suits her personality.
Oh, thank you. So to get to talking about your music, you know, I'm always curious how people first got on the path. And I know you're from Shrewsbury, Shropshire, and I just wonder, you know, how did you find your way to saxophone, jazz, if you want to call it jazz, creative music, Black American music? What was the way in for you?
So I had really musical family upbringing. I don't think anyone in my family, certainly at the time, was like a professional musician, as you put it, but everyone loved music. So, you know, my granddad played piano. He self-taught actually, and played loads of music from the American Songbook. So I kind of grew up with that and singing with him and all that kind of thing. But obviously I wasn't thinking of it like that at the time. I was just singing with my granddad. But also things like My Fair Lady and, you know, all those sorts of showstoppers. And what else? So my dad is a trumpet player. He now plays trombone. Actually, he's sort of retaken up an instrument again recently. Had a bit of time out when he first sort of retired. So he was actually always into doing his own arrangements. He had like a sort of local brass group that. So I kind of grew up with him just doing that. He didn't really compose as such, but he did like really kind of out there arrangements, you know, really quite comedic, you know, often. And so my childhood was often following my dad around doing these concerts at things and all that kind of stuff. My parents both sang in a choir at one point. So you kind of get the idea, like everyone just loved music. So they got me, my parents got me learning piano from when I was 4. So as soon as I started school, and it was actually a friend of my dad's that was giving me lessons kind of for free, I think. So that's what I did, like every Monday after school. And I kind of really resented it at first because all my friends would be out playing, and that's what I did every Monday. But it means that I can't really remember not reading music, which is
wow.
Or not being able to read music. So that's quite cool. So I did. That's what I did. I did piano, and then when I was about 10, I was kind of getting fed up with my piano lessons. I was always, up for writing my own stuff and doing my own thing, and not really doing what I was supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Yes.
So it was there from the beginning. But my dad was really keen to get me on an instrument where I could go and play with other people, like in a band and stuff. So we had this clarinet knocking around. I learnt that for a bit, and then at some point in my early teens, my dad had started playing in this local big band because a friend of his was like an ex-pro from London. He'd moved out, and that's when I first heard the tenor saxophone properly kind of in action on like in a sentimental mood. And I was like, that's really cool. I want to play that instrument.
That's so
but again, it was just a hobby. I didn't ever think I was going to be a musician. So yeah. But that's kind of where it started.
It's so interesting how people identify what becomes their instrument. That's a really interesting story that you actually consciously saw it and said, okay, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And obviously the background in piano lessons and then having learned clarinet made it a natural leap.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And this is what, like 12?
12, 13, something like that. Yeah. So I quickly got very bored with the clarinet. So I was kind of just doing, and my dad was kind of interested in checking out jazz as well. So he kind of started buying the sort of kind of box sets and compilations, like introductions to jazz and stuff, even though actually I'd already... I'd kind of grown up with a lot of Ella Fitzgerald recordings as well. So I kind of could, like the rep was kind of in my head anyway.
Wow, that's so great.
So it was just quite kind of all quite natural. And I'd kind of gone back to playing piano, even though I wasn't getting lessons for a while, and just sort of singing and playing the piano at the same time. So I just sort of really pushed all that kind of, those sorts of skills like on just because I liked doing it kind of thing.
Right.
And it just kind of went from there, really. I kind of went back to having a few piano lessons. I loved playing Ravel really badly. All that kind of stuff. And but I decided, it wasn't until I was sort of 17, 18 that I decided to, like, I'm going to be a musician,
And soon after that, you were at the Royal Academy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I sort of took a gap year because I decided so late that I kind of needed a bit more time to kind of do my shed time.
Wow.
So I kind of threw myself into that and then did my auditions and then off I went. So, yeah.
So what you mentioned the compilations. I had a similar experience as a young child, hearing a full range of, what was jazz up till that point. And I gravitated towards the final two LPs in the collection. Did you have the same sort of experience?
Yeah,
so
I immediately,
Well, for me, it was like Cecil Taylor and, Fusion wasn't really happening yet because we're talking early 70s.
Yeah,
so Cecil Taylor and Eric Dolphy and Ornette Coleman and Coltrane. Miles, but not Electric Miles. I heard that only a few years later, and then Weather Report But there probably was already electric stuff in the compilations that you had.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'm trying to think I definitely gravitated towards the sort of Wayne Shorter orientated material pretty early. Like definitely. But yeah, you don't think of it like that though, do you? To me, it was just exciting sounds, and just like, wow, what is that,
Well, and the other thing that I've thought about is that, our generation, I'm considerably older than you, but I'll just claim that out there. No,
yeah, do it.
But like we took in all the music from all these different periods on an equal footing. Didn't see it as, this is the electric stuff and this is the acoustic stuff and this is the ballad stuff and this is the,
Yeah.
and like a lot of musicians my age and obviously, in your cohort and your generation too, don't see any reason to have a separation between those different things. It's just all part of a continuum that all exists alongside itself. And I think that's a really interesting difference, and it's a really interesting thing in your music, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely. It's really difficult, isn't it, to imagine not hearing what you've heard, kind of thing, isn't it? It's kind of, you can't really ever put yourself in the shoes of how people felt about the music, when it was new or when it hadn't happened, as it was happening. Yeah, it's really hard to get your head around that. Yeah.
Well, I suppose it's probably still happening with newer music, but among musicians that I know, it just seems to be an acknowledgement that everything is happening all the time, and it's all valid and worth pursuing. I mean, not everyone, of course, but yeah. So, but when you got to the Royal Academy, I mean, did you immediately feel like you were walking into a room where you were with kindred spirits, like you were seeing eye to eye with everybody?
It just felt amazing to be around, not just on, it's kind of a bit different over here in the UK, like how sort of jazz courses have evolved. That's like a whole other thing. But like the jazz course that I was on was relatively small. So it wasn't, but it was just a sense of like being in that place in the UK, not just like jazz course people, but like everybody, just being around people who are so excited about music and, it was just amazing being around people who loved it as much as I do, because even though there were lots of people that were into music in Shropshire, like it's just on another level, so yeah, it felt like a sort of, I found my home, I found my place now. That's how I felt when I started.
Your dad must have been incredibly proud when you went off to the Royal Academy.
Yeah, well, I think he was sort of kind of skeptical when I first was like, oh yeah, I'm going to be a musician. And he was like, okay. But I think, as time moved on, I think, he's very proud. And they're all my family, they're really, really supportive, and my groupies.
Great.
So I'm
wonderful.
Very lucky to have such a supportive family. So yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, let's talk about your composing and projects a little bit, but I wanted to play, in addition to having heard Amber, play a little bit of another piece from your new album. It's called Morning Song. I love that. It's so beautiful. You have such a great band too. Really,
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky. Yeah,
can you
very
name
special
names?
players. Yeah, so we've got you heard there Ross Stanley on piano and Chris Montague on guitar and James Madron on drums.
Really, really great sound. Really well recorded. We're proud to have it on Greenleaf Music. So thank you
Thank you,
for
Dave.
doing
Yeah,
it for us.
I'm proud to be there.
But I was looking at this program that you were a part of, BBC New Generation, and it feels like in the developing of your composing voice, that must have been sort of an important step.
Oh yeah, that scheme was absolutely incredible. For so many reasons. I mean, when I found out about that, I just couldn't. I was kind of in shock. When you get some news. I mean, I'm trying to. How old was I? I think I can't even remember. Is it 10 years ago? 2012. Yeah, that's 10 years ago, isn't it?
Something like that. So,
yeah, and I remember I was kind of having a play with some people. In fact, I was at Ross's flat or something with some people, and I just got this news. I was
wow.
It was just one of those things where I'd sort of been vaguely aware of other people. Like a couple of people who I really respected musically, kind of having got that, but it wasn't ever something I thought that I would be doing, if you know what I mean. It was just kind of totally floored me. It was brilliant for performing experience, and just because you kind of get thrown into doing lots of broadcasts straight away, so just getting used to that and it not kind of bothering you, having a lot of pressure kind of on you, and the other thing, as you quite rightly commented, because you're given this amazing platform to show your work.
Yeah.
You're not restricted to just one project, because so often, you know how it is when you do your own thing, you really have to put kind of all your eggs in one basket, if you really want to go for something, because that's all the space that there is for it, really. Or certainly that's kind of what I found kind of coming up. And so it was just great to be able to get to the point where, okay, so you've done some things with your band and all that kind of stuff, and now we're going to throw you into this session and you can just do some random, I had one session where it was myself, a violinist who kind of plays folk music. He's a classical musician, but he kind of does folk playing, really amazing folk playing as well, and a bit of improv and stuff. And then I had this sort of director actor kind of friend of mine in the mix. And so you get the opportunity to just explore and and I got to do some orchestral projects as well. So, being able, absolutely incredible.
Right. Well, I was thinking, as a composer, that must have really opened you up to
big time
to sort of thinking on a different scale.
Yeah.
And you got to write for orchestras and chamber groups and different situations.
Yeah. So some of it was BBC orchestras. Some of it was music that I'd actually kind of written before, and then I had the opportunity to actually do it for live for the first time. Some of it was special recording projects, so recordings or live broadcasts in a commission. And then other things were kind of just the opportunity to, because it's a BBC thing, it means that you've kind of got a bit more of a budget to kind of take risks and things. So I kind of did some things with string quartet and, and ask kind of guests that I wouldn't normally, be able to. So
did you feel, when you got in these situations, did you feel like your quote unquote jazz education had given you the craft and the skills to take on those kinds of, you did?
Yeah.
Well, that's a big kudos to Nick Smart and the program at the Royal Academy then.
Yeah. I mean, Nick kind of was just coming in. He was doing lots of brilliant things when I was finishing up my degree, and he sort of became head of that course just after, but he was kind of very much there in the mix. But really, I would say Pete Churchill has, I need to owe him a lot of thanks, because he just ran such inspiring composition classes every week, and it was just like amazing. He just gave everyone just an amazing kind of craft and tool set to. I mean, I was into it anyway, but very inspiring person, gave me the confidence to take on things. And he gave me tips as well, like when I left, on like cool little books to check out and things that were useful and all that kind of stuff. So
it's a really interesting thing to teach and to study, and it's never ending. But the fact that you had that hands-on experience, and then, like you said, an ongoing resource, but also, craft.
Yeah.
I have this excerpt that you sent me from a piece called Pocket Compass, and this is a section called Chorale. And I was just going to ask, when it's obviously has a very distinctive sound and approach. What was your way in to creating that?
What was my way in? I mean, bearing in mind I'd grown up with a lot of, even though it wasn't necessarily what I was doing as a child, like my dad listened to a lot of heavy orchestral music, and so I'm sure all those sort of sounds and colours, had a massive impact on how I kind of approached kind of what, the colours that I wanted to go for, because they'd just been in my ears, like even though I didn't, necessarily know what they were at the time, and maybe it wasn't the same setting that I kind of got into. But I guess I think really how I've always approached sort of orchestral things is just, like if I'm checking out a recording, so if I hear like a texture or a color or something really interesting that kind of really grabs me, I'll just literally look at the score and like work out how it was achieved. And that's kind of how I've always done it, really. So I've just it's kind of that, I mean, it's the same for everyone, isn't it? It's that kind of pairing of instinct and sort of having an idea of what you want to go for, and then sort of just gradually like figuring out how to achieve it better, and learning from people. And actually every time I do like an orchestrally kind of thing, I try and take an opportunity to do some more listening and check out a score I haven't kind of looked at before, or just, some bits, so but yeah, just color, just thinking of color and like.
Can I ask which composers do you tend to go and look at?
I had a big phase of listening to, I'm going to get it wrong now, but I think it's the Concerto for Orchestra, Lutoslawski's Concerto for Orchestra. That was like a big influence at one point. Yeah. Some amazing sounds in there. Ravel and Debussy were like really early kind of influences, which is the same for a lot of jazz musicians, because for obvious reasons of like use of harmony and also the time, the early 20th century. I mean, over the years, feels like everybody. But I mean, I've got loads of like little miniature string quartet scores, sort of Janacek, Beethoven. I've sort of dipped into most things at some point. Wow. So, but I don't think of myself as an expert in orchestration. I just, I take that jazz approach. You were just talking about it a minute ago about whether jazz gives you, and I think what it gives you is a certain sense, a strong sense of self. And it's like the sort of, you sort of take things and add to what you already do with your voice, don't you? I mean, that's kind of how I think about what we do. And so I think it's quite an enabling way to think about writing music, because you're not there going like, oh yeah, I know everything about whatever. You're just going like, okay, I know what I want to say in this moment, and maybe something like that.
Yeah, well, yeah, if that works for you. I know a lot of people who aren't like that, who do know everything. I used to be one of them. But I guess the other thing I would ask just before playing this is there's also feels like a sense of freedom within the ensemble, like what the individual players are doing. It seems like they have some choices and there's some interactions going on. So how did you think about constructing that environment? It's not a natural one for those players.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you can hear it most at the beginning of the track, actually. And I gave, I kind of split the orchestra, not like, visually, but just, in terms of texture and color. I just kind of thought about how to split them all up. And I then I think I gave them like a choice of pitches, like probably about 3. And obviously I knew which chord, like, right. the small jazz kind of group was going for and all that kind of stuff. So I just kind of laid it up so that they had kind of like 2 pause chords, and it was kind of conversational. So you'd have one half of, but again, like not like literally kind of split like that, but just, so you've got half the players, kind of good spread of strings. And I kind of told them techniques, so, use mute or whatever. And I just said, kind of improvise, and because it's out of time, it takes the pressure off them because it's out of time. It's just pause chords. It's just kind of on the nod. It's collective sound,
Right. Yeah.
All the jazz is improvising. So it was quite an effective way of getting that freedom in the orchestra, and was one of the more effective. I try different things all the time. I'm not afraid to kind of make people, if they don't normally improvise, that's kind of cool. I don't really mind what happens. I just like creating an interesting kind of setting, but it kind of came out quite well on this, I think, at the beginning.
It really is effective. And it's always striking to me how people who insist that they don't improvise, that given clear parameters and choices of what to do, they're actually brilliant improvisers.
Yeah.
And so then it calls into question, well, what is improvisation really? And what is this activity that we do? And so you really brought them into it. Let's hear a little bit of this. That's absolutely gorgeous. So what is the ensemble?
The jazz group, or the whole. So you've got the BBC Concert Orchestra, which is the orchestra, and then the jazz group. So it's again James Madron on drums and Chris Montague on guitar. But then we have Callum Gawley on bass and Gwilym Simcock on piano.
Wonderful. And but the orchestra players are BBC
Concert Orchestra,
Concert
and it's
Orchestra,
Andre. I should say the conductor is Andre Derrida as well. I should say that.
Nice, that's fantastic. So I have to. I did a little bit of research and I found out that you have a PhD. So I'm so sorry I didn't know that. But I'm glad I know it now. Well, congratulations. That's quite a bit of work. But also interesting to read that it was around the work on this festival that you've been doing for a number of years, Emulsion, and that the topic was specifically about collective action and audience interaction. And can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the easiest way to explain it is just talking about why or how I came to do it. That's usually the best way to set these things up. So I'd been running Emulsion, which, in a nutshell, it was kind of a response. I was kind of frustrated with how things were promoted and how genre is just so, just the way that everything's. It was just kind of a frustration as a young artist, coming out of music college and wanting to explore, and it just seemed like everyone wanted to force you into these, pigeonholes, and so it was kind of a reaction to that, really. And it's kind of taken.
I have no idea what you're talking about. No, sorry, go ahead.
It was just that classic thing. I'm very much someone, if someone says no, it just sort of makes me go, well, I'll show you. And that's kind of, so that's kind of how it started, really. And it's done it. It's existed in loads of different ways, and I don't set any targets for myself whatsoever. If another one happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. That's kind of how I've always kind of approached it. And then it just sort of got to the point where when I got that Radio 3 scheme thing, I really wanted to get Emulsion on the radio. And I was like, I really want to do a festival and it kind of, do a kind of 2-day thing and kind of get some interesting people involved and stuff. And I did that, and that was all great, but it was absolutely exhausting. It kind of completely broke me. Loads of great stuff happened within the festival, but it was like a real sort of, it was like a real kind of check for me. I was like, well, what am I going to do with this? What am I going to do with this thing? And it was around that time I went to Banff, actually, kind of not long after that particular festival had happened, and I was just sort of thinking about what I would do with it. And the Banff that I was on, VDI, I was curating it at the time, and there were all sorts of, as you get yourself being a curator of Banff, you get to invite, or VJ was inviting all these really interesting people into the space and talk, so it was just a really great. I just really wanted to just absorb some ideas and just not be putting out, that's kind of why I wanted to go, and just to be around people I didn't know and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And when I came back, I think I'd sort of got some ideas of how I might want Emulsion to move forward. And a big part of that was how new music, and when I say new music, I just mean music that people haven't heard before, music where people don't know what to expect, and, it's kind of harder to listen to just because people don't know what to expect. Not that it's, anything in particular. And I was like, well, how do we crack this? How do I get better at kind of dealing with this issue? Because obviously, I love writing music, and this is going to be something I'm dealing with for a long time. So I'd kind of decided that I wanted to do some kind of research. I thought maybe I'll apply to a foundation here or something. And then someone I know kind of suggested that I kind of put this into a PhD. And I think if I hadn't gone to Banff and been around a lot of basically America, even though it's in Canada, a lot of Americans are there, and people tend to do PhDs more in the States. It's kind of not as much of a thing here. I'm not saying it isn't a thing, but and I think if I hadn't had that experience, I probably would have been like, no way, I'm not doing a PhD. And I don't have I didn't have a master's either, so it was a big. And I hadn't done an academic undergrad. But I was like, okay, cool, let's do it. Let's, so that's kind of why I ended up doing it. And I mean, in a nutshell, I put on some events. I kind of we really did work with some audience members and got some kind of music happening where you had musicians doing their thing, but then you had like audiences kind of improvising with kind of noise sounds and stuff. And I worked a lot with a trumpeter called Percy Persglove, who was really into all these kinds of things too. So trying to sum up a PhD is hard, but that's kind of sort of what I ended up doing with it.
So a study of audience interaction and collective action among new music makers and consumers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. And when did you get the degree? Like how long ago was that?
I finished my thesis at the beginning of the pandemic. So
wow.
From that point of view, it was well timed because I was like, I don't know when I'm going to have time to finish this off because I'd done like, all the practical work had been done mainly in 2018. And I just had to write it up. But I just kept, as you know, things come up all the time and you think, oh yeah, I've got this time to do this. And then you're like, actually, no, I don't.
Right.
So I finished up my thesis at the beginning of COVID.
Wow.
So I had a sort of slightly removed experience at the beginning of COVID because I was just literally doing that all day, every day for about 6 weeks.
Wow.
And then
what a way to experience the lockdown. Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, really intense. Yeah, really intense. But yeah, so I mean, basically once you've done that first, like kind of final draft, which isn't your final draft, but final working draft kind of thing, that's the main chunk of the work done because after that, it's just getting feedback and tweaking things. So I really had, by the sort of middle of May, and then, the Viva comes later and stuff, but the main work was kind of done.
Oh, so it's pretty recent. So will you continue to do the Emulsion Festival?
I think at some point I will. I'm not putting a deadline on myself for when or how it's going to be yet. But I'm sure at some point it'll happen again. But I sort of... it's been, as we all know, it's been such an exhausting time and just, we're only just getting to the point where we can kind of enjoy small band gigs again and start to do, so the thought of kind of organising like a festival or something like that needs so much planning and so much time of yourself and all that kind of thing. I'm not really there yet, but I'm sure I will be at some point.
It's so mainly a function of the COVID situation that you're sort of holding off on.
Partly COVID, I guess, or like how I, I don't know. Like, I think it's just that natural reflection thing that we do, when you do something big and you really have to think through how you think about yourself and your music and your life when you write up a thesis. There's just no way out of it. That's kind of what you have to do. And it's a really amazing experience, actually, even though it's kind of also really overwhelming and stressful.
Wow.
So I just don't feel like I've reflected on that yet. And I know that when I come out of that and I'm ready for it, I'll think about everything in a very different way and what I want to do. So I don't want to rush into anything.
That's really interesting. I mean, I'm glad that during all that same time you've been able to work with this great band and put this album together. And I want to ask you about all these dates that you're doing, but maybe let's play another track from the record first.
Sure.
The Ness. And there's a beautiful video, right?
Yeah.
The clip, so people can go look for that. But let me just play a little bit of this. That's fantastic. You know, somebody wrote to me after this started appearing on all the different places it's now beginning to appear, and they said, you know, I was just sitting there listening, and it's grooves so good, and the sounds are so great, and then I got really upset in the middle because I couldn't hear the bass. And yeah, he wrote, and then I got up and I looked at the credits again and I realized, oh, there's no bass. Okay, my system it's working.
That's funny.
Yeah. So you're playing kind of all over the UK this month and next month. Yeah,
the only place that we've missed is Northern Ireland, which is very sad because my husband's from Northern Ireland and I love playing in Ireland just across the board. And some of the last gigs we did actually before COVID were in Northern Ireland and Ireland. So yeah, we're not going to Northern Ireland, but the rest of the UK we're going to. Amazing tour, amazing kind of thing to be able to do after everything that we've not been able to do. Yeah.
Tell me about Wigmore Hall. You have a associate artist position there. So I guess this record release gig is a part of that association.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So that, again, was one of those kind of completely out of the blue surprise moments. And it was about a year ago, I think, they announced it. And I didn't find out about it much before that. Like, I just kind of got an email and I just couldn't believe it. I think we'd maybe got to the point where, so I did a live stream concert with Ross, who's in the band. We do lots of duo playing together anyway, but so I think we'd already got that in the diary, and even that was kind of like one of those kind of nuts, like silver linings that came out of COVID, because, you know, Wigmore were kind of approaching their programming really differently because they had to, and they were really. I don't know how much this stuff comes up in the States, but Wigmore and John Gilhooly, who runs Wigmore, just were really like at the front of they were just pushing ahead with supporting artists and doing all this like all these really progressive things, and just they really led the way. They really put like a lot of bigger organizations to shame, in my opinion. so we'd kind of got this live stream coming up, and then John invited me to, and it was part of a bigger thing where there were lots of other associate artists being announced as well. But just an unbelievable honor, because I had played there before, like kind of a few years previously, probably when I was doing the BBC scheme, in fact. And the sound in there is just, it's just insane. Like I've never experienced anything like that anywhere else. Wow. And so it's just been brilliant. Just kind of, we did a bit of recording in there last summer, Ross and I, and then obviously doing the band there in a few days. Just dream.
Congratulations.
Yeah, dream.
It's all happening now. Yeah. And this piece, The Ness, tell me a little bit about the background on that and the title.
Yeah. It started with some images that were sent to me by a filmmaker called Rose Hendry, who I'd worked with before on a music video a few years previously. And she was stuck in Scotland, but on the coastline. So she kind of had access to this stunning coastline, and she'd been taking pictures and videos, and I was stuck in the city, and like we kind of had this thing where a few people I knew were in really beautiful locations, and I'd be messaging them saying, oh, can you please send me photos? And they were like, does it not make you feel bad that you're stuck in the city? And I was like, no, I just want to you can just imagine I'm there. So she sent me these images, and she was dealing with, like, her family was dealing with some really hard stuff, and we were both, I don't know, talking about how we felt we had to make things, like we just had this compulsion to make things, and just how awful that time was, that because we all felt like we couldn't make things the way that we were used to making them. And so I said, well, I'm about to write this solo cello piece for, and Rose actually knows Louise as well, for Louise McMonagle, who's a long-time friend of mine as well. And that was like a proper lockdown project, because I'd kind of wanted to write a solo thing for her for a long time, but just hadn't had the time to sort of sit down and do it. So I was like, well, why don't I use your images and videos as a starting point for the piece, and then it'll be like a kind of collaborative thing, and it'd be really fun. And so that worked out really well. But then sort of as I was writing the piece, I was kind of thinking, oh, these little bits would be quite cool with the band. And so eventually I kind of rewrote I just took kind of themes or riffs or little moments from the cello piece, and then turned it into something else for the band.
That's great. And so the Ness, it just refers to the images that you got from Rose.
Yeah,
really.
So we decided, it was a group decision, but we called the cello piece Round by the Ness. And I haven't got it in front of me, so I'm not going to try and pronounce or remember the proper name of the coastline. But Rose spent a lot, she's a details person, just like me. And she spent ages deciding what the subtitle should be and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
But anyway, so we decided on Round by the Ness. And then for the band, I just decided to call it The Ness, just because,
Great. Well, thank you so much. I was thinking I would go out with something from the previous record. This band, it's called My Iris, not My Irish, for anyone who My Iris, and it's an ongoing project. I'm sure you're already working on the next book of music and all of those things. So I'm really grateful to have the time to talk to you, and it was really interesting. And thanks again for highlighting the For Refugees project.
Wow.
Thanks
for the platform, and Amber's always over the moon to get the message out. So
well, it's so important right now, and what's happening in the UK and in the rest of Europe, and of course all around the world, and here too.
Yeah.
People need help.
They do.
So thank you for being involved in that. So we'll go out with this piece called IF, and I couldn't find. I did a little bit of research. I couldn't figure out what it refers to.
Okay, so I kind of, sometimes I call it IF and IF, but it's I'm going to try. It's got a bit of a story. But it essentially started with a little bit from a Marcel Dupré organ piece that Ross kind of put me onto, because he's a really stunning organist as well. And there was just this little bar where it had this cool harmony thing. And so I'd kind of written a little homage. I called it like Mood for Dupré. And we didn't really gig it. It just sort of ended up in one of these emulsion workshops, you know, so the emulsion project I was talking about, these experimental things. I don't know how it ended up there. It somehow did. And so we had like musicians kind of playing it and then segueing into something else, which kind of had a backbeat. And then at the same time, you had all these sort of participants, people kind of making weird kind of voice noises and stuff. And so that's where all the sort of textures and sounds come from in that piece. And it's called IF basically because Chris and Ross they have a little boy each, and so it's their initials. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's no way I would have ever figured that out. So thanks for just telling me. Perfect. Wow. Thank you so much. Great to talk to you.
You too, Dave.
Great to see you. All right. I'm sure everyone is going to love this record, and good luck on all the upcoming shows.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you for listening to this podcast with Trish Clowes. This is Dave Douglas. Once again, please join us at greenleafmusic.com. Subscribe, get the episodes, get the music, check out what's happening, get advance warning. And like that, have a good one. We'll see you on the next.